It's real. It's real. You know the deal. You know the deal. Come on.
Hey, it's Shanté.
And I'm Natalie. And welcome to What's the Deal, a podcast powered by the Norfus Firm. At the Norfus Firm, we solve people problems. We work with clients all around the world on diversity, equity, and inclusion and HR strategy. Our podcast focuses on a leader's involvement in DEI, since we know that's the place where these efforts are made or broken.
Exactly. So speaking of leaders, have you ever worked in an organization where something wasn't right with somebody at the higher level, like highest or higher, one of the higher levels in the organization? You're like, I don't know about you. I don't know if I can really trust you. So it's like, so what's up? How does that work? What's the deal with that? The trust.
What's the deal with the lack of trust?
Yeah.
So when we prepared for this, you said something really cool about, I wrote it down, about the fact that people's words and actions aren't matching.
Right. Exactly. So there's a lack of integrity.
Right.
Their word is not their bond. All of you hip hop heads out there. And so it's like, it's really, but that's what it is though.
Right.
It really is that thing where we're going to do all the things that we say we're going to do, but then we don't actually do them.
And so when I was getting ready for this podcast, I, had to start with sort of the baseline of like, well, what's the deal? Why does trust matter? And I think it had me look back at some of the senior leadership assessments we've done. So we consistently go to look at the way the leaders look at, like senior leaders, C-suite, their direct reports, how they look at DEI efforts in terms of how an organization is doing them, and then how does everyone else? Right. And we often ask the question of, what do you value most about the fact that your organization is engaging in these DEI efforts?
Right.
So I looked back at some of those assessments we've done, and it was about 30 senior leaders covering organizations that add up to about 15,000 employees. So multiple of these assessments that we've done. And what I found really interesting, we're talking about 30 senior leaders that are covering organizations with thousands of employees. Mm-hmm. On this question of what do you value most, out of the 30, 75% of those that we interviewed expressed some kind of concern about whether or not the organization would be able to really execute on these commitments that they've made. Like, they were really excited about the commitments, but they were like, can we do it? It was kind of more so getting into the how. Right. And like we talked about in another episode, make sure you have an expert doing DEI so that people can feel confident about the how. But that was stunning to me. Like, they weren't even so trusting of their ability to get it done.
And this is the leadership team, right?
Right.
So this is not even employees doing an assessment or evaluation or review of the leadership team. This is the leaders themselves not having confidence in themselves. Yeah. Wow. So if you don't have confidence in yourself in any regard, how do you expect your people to?
Okay. Well, that gets back to some self-exploration.
Right.
The other thing that was notable about some of these interviews was that 90% did not understand their role in a really sort of typical day-to-day process of recruiting. So I think when you expand that out, why does that matter? Because that gets back at what we say of like, this needs to be integrated, mm-hmm. and you have to be able to see your part in it.
Right.
And so not so confident that we can do it, and also not fully seeing your part in it. Right. So when I say they weren't seeing their part in the recruiting process, 90% of those 30 or so leaders we talked to answered that it was on their HR teams to bring them the right candidate, right? As opposed to their proactivity in it. So I thought that was interesting. And then you sort of like take that a step further. Wharton did a study on, we'll talk about Wharton, but not yet. Actually, it's an organization called Just Capital. And what they looked at is, where are we? They're a nonprofit that focuses just on understanding how businesses work and different in the know or in the times issues. And what they did was survey about 2,000 employees across 12 industries last year. And, they asked the question around, does your organization have a commitment to DEI? And the good news is the vast majority of both employees and senior leaders in their group thought yes. Employees were at 74%, felt that there was a commitment, and leaders were in the 94%. The issue there is that gap.
Right.
There's a 20% difference between the way employees were seeing their employer's commitment and the way the employers, meaning the senior leaders, saw that their own commitment. Right. I thought that was really interesting because we do see that a lot, where there's a gap
schism between what the employees experience and then what the leadership thinks is going on in the organization. And so it's that gap. That's what happens with the misalignment of where people think they're going, which also comes back to, okay, so what's going on in that gap though?
Right. It's a symptom of a lack of trust.
Right.
Now, before we get too far, we love shared language.
Sure.
First thing, why aren't we talking about, we're talking about trust, which takes us often, we always talk about trusted spaces. But why aren't we talking about safe spaces?
So safe spaces is there's a relationship between trust and safe spaces, but it's like you can't really cultivate safe spaces. And again, another little side note, we're moving away, as you mentioned, from the term safe spaces, just because you don't really know what's safe for anyone based on their collective experience, their individual experience, their history, their traumas, whatever it is, you don't know if something is safe or not. So you as a leader can't really create a safe space
from the
outset, right? You don't know. So we like to say trusted spaces because it gets at more of what you're trying to create and which you can influence, which is creating a space for people to feel like they can trust you and be vulnerable. They can take risks. They can have conversations at a little bit of a deeper level that requires a level of intimacy and vulnerability that doesn't exist unless you've done the work. And so, again, safe spaces, not really something that you can control. Trusted spaces, though, you can show up for,
right?
And you can be intentional about creating space. But just another little note, it's not a one-time thing. You got to be really, really clear about that, because people think that they can have a conversation with someone that they've never talked to ever before. Like this open door thing that we keep talking about. So executives are like, yeah, I have an open door policy. They can just come right in. Who's coming right in?
Right.
You haven't developed a relationship with anyone. You haven't gotten to know who they are as people, not other than what's outside of their job. So why would they walk through that door? You as a leader have to make sure to constantly put in the effort to create these spaces where folks will want to come in and have a conversation with you before it even gets to the point where it's critical or crucial or whatever you need to call that, courageous, whatever conversations people have when it's heightened. People just need to be able to come in and have that kind of rapport built up before you can even get into a place where the trust is really, really like it hinges, like the conversation hinges on the ability to trust.
Which is really the beauty of the word trust. Mm-hmm. Is very action oriented. So
Absolutely.
When we look at, again, this idea of, well, what do we mean by trust? Of course, we had to go to the dictionary. If y'all don't know by now, I love the dictionary. So the definition of trust is beautiful because it really is tangible, right? So when we look at the definition of trust, it's a firm belief in the reliability, truth, ability, or strength of someone or something. So if we look at that in, I trust you, it can mean that I believe that you're going to be reliable, meaning you're going to show up. This goes to that, like, we can't do it one time. Like when you say you're going to do something, you do it and it happens
every single time,
consistent.
Though. Right.
That the truth, like, you're going to be honest with me. We talk a lot about transparency and authenticity, and all of that boils back to this concept of truth. Like you're telling me you're going to be honest with me, which in this day and age is more important than it's ever been before. Ability. Mm-hmm. I believe in your ability to get it done. Now, I think a lot of us don't believe in the ability of certain people to get things done, and that becomes problematic. That actually, a good example of that is when what we talked about in the episode around resourcing, that you're hiring a marketing expert to be a DEI person. People are going to be like, well, can they really get that? Do they have the ability to do this? Like, do they even know? And then the last piece is the strength. And when I think about strength, I think that comes up a lot too. Like, when it's time to have a courageous conversation, when it's time to make a really important business decision, are you going to have that fortitude
to show up
to do it.
Yeah.
So when you think about trusted spaces, and in this just definition, and space is really any place in which someone does work.
Right.
But when you think about the fact that we're dealing with trust, you can actually implement it, right? You can act on it. You can do these things. So,
but it's the doing.
Right. Now, here's the thing. This is where your expertise comes in. How do you build these trusted spaces?
It takes time. It takes.
No one ever wants to hear that. Shanté, no one ever wants to hear that.
Why can't I just do this the one time and can you lose as much weight as you want to lose going to the gym once? No. Eating one salad?
I would
no.
be really at my ideal weight constantly if I just went to the one time.
I'd be there tomorrow.
Exactly.
It doesn't work that way. Like anything that you want to improve upon, have an impact on, anything takes practice. And this isn't not any different. Like this is also a practice of building trust with people, having relationships with people, getting in people's worlds and taking that time. So it takes effort, right? You have to get into people's worlds, as I just mentioned. And then you have to, you yourself have to be authentic. And so what does that mean? Again, no one wants to hear all the details of everything, right? You don't need to do that either. We talked about that in a couple of episodes back, like just don't dump on people. Right. But enough of yourself so people get a sense of who you are, right? And as a person, and it's something that you can connect to, relate to. Because again, another part of this, these spaces is the connection piece. So what can we connect to, even though we have completely different backgrounds, experiences, et cetera, there's still a level of humanity that we can all tap into. So it's finding the connection. It is doing that over and over and over again. And it's creating a space for folks to feel like they can be psychologically safe. And especially that's the big part at work is is it safe for me to talk about these things? Which
comes with time. So I think that, again, like your point around doing it over and over will mean that you can be okay if you're sharing information about yourself and someone doesn't immediately share something intimate or personal about themselves, it doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong or it didn't work. It means that, again, to get to this point of feeling safe, which is why we don't focus on that, safety takes time, right? Because safety is like over time in your presence. I feel like I can say or do certain things and there's not going to be a negative consequence. You can't know that the first time you talk to someone. So this idea of the repetitiveness of it and getting comfortable with it, I think about it a lot in terms of like, if we're going to go and talk to the person who's closest to you, whether it's like a best friend or your spouse or partner or whoever, like what would they say about you? Right. And those are some of the ways that you can start to think about how you're going to share part of you, again, with some level of balance, because again, you don't have to tell everybody everything. So what are some of the mediums or some of the ways in which senior leaders can organically or authentically start to create that trust over and over? What are some of the methods?
Right. So, whenever you start a conversation with someone, don't just jump into business. Take a little bit of time and, chop it up a bit, like get some banter going,
Chop it up.
Just have a conversation about their day. Or, we did an icebreaker recently that we loved with a client. We just asked them, what's one word that would describe your week? Simple. People think about it, they share it, and then that word just opens up a conversation around, okay, what contributed to that word being the word that you chose.
And there were some really powerful words that came out, right? Overwhelm, empowered, challenging. I mean, and then it was like, that gives you some insight into
just where people are.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's opening up the conversation that way. And then also, again, like, as we mentioned, sharing a little bit about yourself. It's being very, very, again, the intentional part about it shows up every single time with this. It can't be a throwaway thought. You have to want to get to know your people, because we're energetic beings. We pick up on that. Mm-hmm. If I sense, okay, she's just doing it just because it's either check the box or some management training program she took 3 days ago told her she needs to connect more with her people. Okay, whatever. I'm not going to engage. And so it has to feel like this is actually something that I really, really want to do.
And it's in the details. Mm-hmm. So one thing that I should say, and I talk about this a lot when I do management trainings, is and we had this note before of you're always on camera, so to speak, if people are always watching you, but just making sure that you're consistent in how you interact with folks. Not that everyone is going to be like wants the same type of interaction, but that you're doing it with everyone. An example can be, if you're working in an office environment and you walk in and you say hi to everyone but like 2 people in the corner, like you didn't make the effort to go over in the corner.
Right.
Those people are like, oh, that person doesn't like me. And then that can lead to that lack of trust. And in your mind, it wasn't intentional. There's nothing malicious about it. It's just, okay, maybe the phone rang or you're late to a meeting or whatever the case may be but it's being thoughtful, intentional about spreading the love, so to speak, and engaging in activities. You can make those 1 or 2 minute efforts with everyone, right? So if you pick something that's too big, that requires lots of time, and you're not going to be able to do that with everyone, then rethink that activity.
Right.
So, wow.
Another one.
Yeah, exactly. Team building and the like. Yeah. So when we come back to just, think about the point here is trust is earned.
Yeah.
Trust and trusted spaces or trust itself is action oriented. Yes. People need to believe that you're going to be reliable, that you have the ability to do it, that you are going to be strong when things are hard.
Right.
Those are things that you can act upon. And then creating time for it, the intentionality behind letting people see you for who you are. And I think, and in closing on that, make sure when you all are doing your performance goals that are even in DEI should be included in the performance goals, of course.
Yes.
But when you're doing your goals, that you're actually making sure to build this trust building time into it. Because if you are constantly saying, I'm too busy, then you're not going to see progress. You're not going to see that. So I think it's also about making space for it intentionally in how you plan out your work. And so on that note, as we could always talk about this forever, we do have to go. And so again, tune in. We're going to be focusing on team building. We're going to be focusing on middle management. And so, stay tuned.
See you soon.
See you soon.